I'm going to quickly introduce our moderator, Natasha Miller-Williams, who is the head of diversity and inclusion with Ferrara Candy Company. And she is joined with Nancy, with Boehringer Ingelheim, and Madupe with Amazon Web Services. I'm going to allow them to self-introduce and get this panel discussion started, but I want to also encourage, please post your questions in real time in the chat function in the sessions tab where you are watching this. There is about a 30-second delay, so let's get those questions in as quickly as possible so I can get them to Natasha, Madupe, and Nancy. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Natasha, and I'll have you guys get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlene. Well, I am so excited to be here. As Charlene mentioned, I am the head of diversity and inclusion at Ferrara Candy Company in Chicago. Many people know us by our delightful brands, Now or Later, Laffy Taffy, Trolley, and many others. And I just want to welcome everyone to this conversation on the challenges and strategies for integrating social justice at work. As Charlene said, I'll be the moderator and really delighted to be able to facilitate this conversation. We all know and are continuing to experience all of the challenges of the past year, and it's really called us to the table on the intersection of work and home life, quite literally. And some of those matters of personal significance that we may have previously kept separate, it's not as easy to do that anymore. Things that we may have talked about at the kitchen table at home, that kitchen table is for some of us our work desk. And so the significance of, talking about social justice topics at work is one that's very relevant for us, and also the role that our employers have in even taking a stance or making a statement on some of the situations that are taking place at a national level as well. So it just kind of begs the bigger question of what is the corporate role in matters of social justice? What is the responsibility of our employers to us as employees and to the marketplace? And how do we just tackle these deeper conversations together without making a career-limiting verbal faux pas? So I'm excited to just have a couple of heavy hitters with me on this virtual call. So I'm going to ask both Madupe and Nancy to more deeply introduce themselves. So Madupe, I'll start with you. And if you can just share with us your organization, tell us the industry, because I think that is relevant in some of the questions that we'll double click into. And then also share how you found yourself in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and Charlene, thank you so much for the invitation to join you all today. I am Madupe Congleton. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I lead the AWS Sales and Marketing Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Strategy. It's about 30,000+ employees globally in the Amazon Web Services business. So everyone, of course, knows that brand of Amazon. I'm sure you're all familiar with Amazon. But, when you think about the cloud infrastructure, and even as Zoom is one of our customers, actually, but how are we able to support, the cloud today, and how we connect with our customers around the world, and how we empower them to be able to deliver the best products and services to their customers. So Amazon Web Services is in the high-tech industry, but I'm super excited to be with you all. I, was introduced to the ID&E space early on in my career. Prior to coming to Amazon, I was at Cisco Systems for 15 years. And during that time, I got involved with employee resource groups or affinity groups participation at a volunteer level. And as I continue to grow and expose myself to leaders throughout the company, I saw their positioning and their commitment to the affinity groups as an opportunity to stretch myself. And fast forward years later, that volunteer engagement turned into me being able to become an influencer as it relates to culture, me having the opportunity to build strategies and, work from the ground up right? So in areas of the business, our Cisco supply chain organization, there was no inclusion and diversity talent strategy overall. And I was able to build that and ensure that it was integrated into our overall workforce strategy. So I've been able to do some exciting things that, focus on whether it was one aspect of inclusion, another aspect of diverse recruiting. And then over the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of focusing on the holistic strategy of ID&E.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Nancy, I'm coming over to you. Tell us a little bit about your company, industry, and how you found yourself in DE&I.
Yes. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, Modupe. It's actually an honor and a privilege to be sitting here with you today. So I'm actually the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Boehringer Ingelheim. We are a German pharmaceutical firm, family-owned, private, and have been for 135 years. I'm based in the Northeast in Connecticut, and I cover a footprint across the United States with 10,000 employees roughly, working in human pharma, animal health, and biopharma. And so some of the therapeutic areas that we make medicines for are cardiovascular, metabolic conditions, as well as respiratory oncology. We have a robust pipeline of drugs coming out to really address the areas, we call them orphan conditions, that most people don't have drugs for or solutions for. On the animal health side, we have 6 species that we cover. The ones that are probably closer to home are the companion animal, dogs and cats and other things. So NexGard and Frontline are our key products. So if you have a cat or a dog, you may be familiar with that as well. On the biopharmaceutical side, we contract manufacture for other pharmaceutical firms as well. We are not in the human vaccine business. I know that's top of mind for everybody, but we do make animal vaccines. As a practitioner in this space, I spent more than 20 years of my career in financial services. And like Modupe, I started with a BRG, or at that time they were called employee network groups. And I started in the 90s, and in that era, started doing this work in the 90s, in addition to my full-time job. And this really was something I personally was very interested in doing. So at any rate, I'm very eager to have this conversation specifically on this topic, because 20 years ago, social justice was off limits, right? And so to bring this into the fray today, I can't wait for us to get into it. So thank you for the opportunity, Natasha. Back to you.
Awesome. Okay. I don't think we talked about this when we were preparing, that we all kind of found our path here just through volunteering in our organizations. I have a very similar story and represented. So we've got technology, farm, and consumer packaged goods. So this is going to be a good conversation. And thought it would be helpful to just align on the definition of social justice, because there could be different points of view, even among us, around what social justice means for ourselves or for our organizations, and how we build that into diversity and inclusion. So Nancy, I'm actually going to come right back to you and just ask you to share the definition of social justice.
So when I think about social justice, there are 3 things that come to mind: privilege, class, and access. When I think about it in the context of healthcare, I think of social justice relative to social determinants. And those are things like equity around laws, policies, procedures, health, income, access to real estate, meaning rentals, home purchases, big ticket items, the community, churches, right? Places of worship, things of that sort, gender abilities, on all levels. So the point is not so much treating everybody equally, but more so treating everybody in an equitable way so that we're not being judged by we're not being judged by a dimension of diversity, but rather being included because we're a person, right? And what we bring to that. So we have equal access, or equitable access, I should say, to every aspect of the social components. Healthcare, for me, that is so important. And I'll just use an example. COVID, for example, we've known before COVID that BIPOC individuals, Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, have been disproportionately impacted by cardiovascular metabolic conditions. And, Indigenous people have a higher risk of those conditions. And yet, when you look at clinical studies, right, they're usually healthy, white, young people that are in those studies. So whether it's intentional or unintentional, I think we have to be much more equitable. And if you recall, as those studies that came out for the vaccines, they were much more inclusive of different groups to see how the medicines played out in different groups. Different groups metabolize medicine differently. And so it's important to understand that all patients are treated equitably, not because I have insurance or I don't have insurance, right? Not because I have more money or less money, but if I'm coming into your store or your place of business, I should be treated the same way as the next person. So that's my broad answer.
Modupe, does your definition of social justice differ from that, or is there anything you would add to it?
Yeah, I would just add a few things. I love the equitable access because I think that it is so important when we think about, social justice, that it really is about continuing to amplify the conversation around systemic inequity, right? And so we have to continue to pull that conversation forward. And one of the things I will say about it's about creating access. It's about creating space to challenge the legacy infrastructures of all systems, right? So when we think about, the perfect way Nancy just described that access, in the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry and what we know of what's happening to, underrepresented communities as it relates to COVID. When we think about the high tech industry, those same type of challenges are there, right? Are we recruiting talent from certain universities? Are we being intentional about ensuring that we are being fair about creating opportunity for people to get better jobs so that they can then go back and support their community, right? One other thing I will say that to me is starting to take a different shape in corporate America as it relates to social justice is how the employees are empowered to use their voice, right? And so it's no longer just about the big system, the CEOs, and they post their comments, they send a message, but how then do we empower the affinity groups, the employee resource organizations? Do we empower the individual employees to actually take what Amazon considers a leadership principle of show bias for action to really just change systems? And so that's what I would say. One of the additional things I would add is that empowerment of the employees within the different organizations.
Yeah, 100%. And and I think, where you're segueing this from an employee perspective is actually a great pivot into where I wanted to double click, which is just all of the implications to the work of DE&I in the workplace right now. Modupe, I believe you're newer in your role right now. I'm newer in my role. I've been in my role just over a year at Ferrara. And I've been asked so many times, well, how challenging is it to build a new DEI strategy? And I think you can even ask it more broadly, just how challenging is it to lead DE&I work right now in this current climate. And I believe many people might say, well, it's challenging to do just about any job right now, living in a pandemic. But when we think more specifically as DEI practitioners, how challenging is it to do this work to support employees, factoring in all of the social justice variables that are at play, especially since 2020. So I'm going to come right back to you, Modupe, and then I'm going to bounce it over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Natasha.
You know what? It's one of those things where you're excited every day to get up and do this work. You're excited about the number of emails and opportunities to be challenged. But it is heavy work. And especially now, since everything that's happened since George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of the different just occurrences from 2020, including the pandemic. And as an inclusion and diversity leader, people forget that you're not robotic, right? That we also have heavy hearts and we are, the spotlight is on us now to go and solve. And as we're trying to solve, time is not our friend, right? And in addition to that time, in many cases, and Nancy, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, we are just starting to really see that investment happen. And so I'm so proud to say that Amazon is investing heavily in inclusion, diversity, and equity, and giving us that opportunity to build comprehensive strategies so that it's not just about inclusive culture, but it's totally about how we are, infusing inclusion, diversity, and equity in every aspect of our company. But then I'll also add this piece of, we are customer obsessed. Everything we do, we work backwards from our customers. And so when we think about social justice, when we think about the challenges of being tasked with doing so much with far little, or not really having all the details of how to step into some of the conversations, the other challenges is our customers are waiting for us to give them the answer. They're looking to us because we are thought leaders in multiple industries to say, what are we going to do, Amazon? What are you doing, Amazon? And so we have to work quickly. We have to move fast, right? We've got to deliver results and we have to be committed. The last thing I'll say that is a challenge is, I personally, I'm still building a team. Although I'm new to Amazon, I've been here 6 months. I've been in this work for the past, 5 years, so to speak. And trying to find talent very quickly, that's a challenge, right? As I'm building and trying to move fast. So there is a talent implication that I don't think people realize. It's not just about someone saying they have the passion for this work, because I think that's one thing that is also something that people misunderstand as a challenge, as, oh, I'm passionate about ID&E, I can do this. And then they realize that this is actually an area of the business that we're forcing to be considered a business imperative. And if it's a business imperative, there's a solid strategy that has goals, that has expected outcomes and key results. And having passion around it does not always equate to someone's ability to do this work successfully. So I'll step off my soapbox for a minute because I'm pretty passionate about this topic. But yeah, there's quite the challenges along with, the joy that comes with it as well.
I'll just laugh quickly with you on that. I was on a call with some other diversity officers earlier this week, and they were talking about what you were just describing, as saying that there are a lot of people that have a desire to enter into the DE&I space around passion and get hired for passion, where you don't often see people being hired as a VP of finance because they're passionate about numbers. So we just kind of giggled about that. Nancy, I'll come back around to you about the challenges of just, in your case, probably growing your DE&I strategy right now.
Well, having been in the space for a long time, at almost 25 years, close to 30, I've seen so many people wanting to jump on the bandwagon, as Modupe said. And I've actually welcomed them into my department or teams, put them on rotations. And it wasn't until they got their hands in it where they're, I don't know how you could do this work day in and day out. Now, to your point, this is not a job. This is our life's work. We're in this as not chief diversity officers. We're in this as change leaders. And I think that the big mistake that our fellow diversity leaders make, not all of them, but ones newer to this process, come at this as, we're going to hire more people of color. We're going to change all of this. I've been at this for 15 years. And you can argue and say, why'd you stay so long? Because I truly believe that long-term change does require continuity, sustainability, consistency. And changing an organization is like turning a ocean liner around in a lake, right? It takes a lot of maneuvering and skill and patience and persistence. And people who want to come in and change the world in a year are in for a rude awakening, because this is not a 3-year gig. And granted, the company may not be right for you for as long as it's been right for me, but BI has certainly been a place where I have grown, where I've been able to get the attention of leadership. Now, to Modupe's point, and with all due respect, corporate America became woke after George Floyd's death. There's no question about it. And I'm sitting back last June saying, I've been saying this, folks, for 14 years. And suddenly, where we want to learn more. But I think the real issue here is getting at the systemic pieces that were taken for granted for all the years, right? Going deeper into your processes, understanding where the fall off rates are in terms of candidates, applying to your company. Is there more of a drop off for candidates of color than there are compared to whites? And if so, why? What's happening at that point? Where are they dropping off? So being able to peel back the onion and the various layers there to look at, what's really happening matters. And I think coming at this with passion is helpful for a project, but it's not going to make change happen.
Okay.
But anyway, Natasha, thanks for the question.
Thank you. And I want to come back around to, companies and the responsibility around, social justice matters. And what did your companies do last year? Did your companies take a stance? And if so, what is a stance? What does that look like? What did you say or do internally? What did you say or do externally? And how are you ensuring that, we've heard that expression, this is, not a moment, this is a movement. So like, how are you backing it up, whatever you did over the past year? So whoever wants to go first with that, please share with us.
Nancy, did you want to go first?
Well, I had something right on the tip of my tongue, Modupe. Let me go quickly.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Natasha. We actually did a couple of things. We introduced the notion of upstander, which is more than a notion; it's a movement. And upstander really is different than allyship. Right. When you look at what it means to be an upstander, an ally, I liken it to sort of the mentor versus the sponsor. An upstander is really the sponsor, the person who puts their reputation on the line for a social injustice or in a micro inequity or a macro inequity or something to that effect. And we've been driving that through. We introduced courageous conversations with the senior leadership team, and I co-facilitated them in a very informal way, but kind of a structured way, like a radio call-in show. And we've had 24 sessions since last June. We had 3 in January after the Capitol insurgents, and we just held one 2 weeks ago, and we have another one next week on anti-Asian sentiment. And I can tell you that these are self-enrollment, and we max out all the time with 300 participants. So we've had over 3,500 people participate since last June. Our CEO internally dedicated a whole town hall, right? And this was a surprise, because usually in town halls, you talk about results, you talk about the business. This was the first time that this was a business topic, in a way that it took the whole agenda. But the best part about this is that we brought 3 employees to come and tell their story. And I just reached out to them through our networks. One of them was a Black female married to a white police officer. Another was a single white female who just talked about her journey. And another was a Black male who talked about what it's like to be in his own neighborhood when his air conditioning system broke down, and went outside at 2 o'clock in the morning with a flashlight and suddenly caught himself to say, oh my gosh, I could get killed in my own neighborhood. And those types of stories really resonated. So that's what we did internally. We joined a couple of action-oriented organizations. So obviously trade associations, the Pharma Equity Initiative. We're part of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce and their equity, race and equity initiative as well. We're part of Paradigm for Parity. That's a bit more on the gender side. We upped our ante with our matching gifts and added some new organizations, not-for-profit organizations, that really could help with inequities, both around healthcare, around incarceration, those types of things. So Equality Justice Institute. So we made some significant changes. And then, of course, we revamped our diversity strategy to a 5-year plan within our 4-pillar framework. So we've been actively engaged externally as well as internally, but it's a journey. We are not at the destination. And belonging, is really a big part of that. So Modupe, over to you.
Yeah, I love that you said it's a journey. I even heard one leader call it a forever journey, right? Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that it is a forever journey, because if we think about it, I just saw a statistic today that said that in order for African Americans to achieve true parity, if nothing was done, it would take 95 years for us to achieve the level of parity for our African American Black community. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really proud of, some of the things that Amazon has done specifically, but I'll talk about AWS specifically, what AWS has done, since that's where I lead. Of course, we've held the courageous conversations, right? And I agree with you, Nancy, that prior to the murder of George Floyd, there was an approach to inclusion and diversity where, it was talked about, the work was done, but it had its place. Whereas when the George Floyd murder happened, the level of people that were ready to rise up and say that I do not support the current conditions externally in my community, I will support Black Lives Matter. And that, of course, begins to, it starts to come inside the confines of corporate, because we encourage people to bring their full selves to work. Well, if I am taking a stance in my community, then I'm taking a stance at home. So those courageous conversations, adding structure and starting to train leaders on not only how to have those courageous conversations, but what do you do with that information once you have that conversation, right? We don't need the spectator sport of listening to the pain of someone from an underrepresented community, but how can we help them understand how to take real action? We've created sponsorship programs, right? We've also increased our ability to partner with organizations externally as we build programs internally. For example, there's a program that we have called Project Pipeline, which is all about helping incarcerated people achieve AWS certifications. So those are the types of programs where we continue to focus on that equity and ensuring that we are doing our part from a community perspective. One other thing that I'm super proud of that we did was we leveraged our brand, the AWS brand. So if you went to the AWS.com site, you would have seen, Black Lives Matter and additional ways to support Black Lives Matter. If you go there today, you may see Stop Asian Hate and additional ways to support the Stop Asian Hate. And what we saw was the impact that had on our customers, where they were surprised to see us leverage the power of our brand to push that type of social justice message. So I'm really proud of that. In addition to hosting the sessions, we continue to just really analyze all of the various programs and systems that impact our employees so that we can ensure that we are being proactive, not just today, but to your point, those 5-year goals. Where do we see ourselves going in the next several years? And how does that then impact how our employees show up? Do they feel valued? Do they feel respected? And how can we be proactive about changing that dynamic? So we've been pretty busy. That's what I'll say. We've been busy and we're on that forever journey. But this is the last piece that I'll share that is probably one of the most powerful things. We often see in, most cases, executives push the message down or they push the message out. And we see the people at the lowest levels of the organization, they speak and they share their experience and they talk about the things that they need. But the breakdown happens at that mid-level manager level. And that's where we are focusing our efforts, of course, across all levels of the organization, but truly being intentional about how we develop those managers so that they create those inclusive environments for everyone to thrive and feel accepted.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. And I'll add to this at Ferrara, particularly being very early in our DEI journey, like right as the pandemic started. So I joined the company in November of 2019. We were in a listening tour, right at the start of the pandemic, and it actually gave us a great starting point to continue to focus on listening to our employees and really to continue to foster this culture of listening, sharing, and promoting more vulnerable conversations, because that really informed, first the strategy itself, and it really helped to set a guide for the areas where we knew it was really important to speak up and take a stance, because we were engaged in active conversations with our employees where we knew that we needed to huddle up and wrap our arms around particular groups of employees. And so we just continue to create that culture. And I use that language quite a bit in every time that I'm in front of an internal audience, that, listening, sharing, empathy, those types of words, particularly internally. And then to the point that both of you raised, really making sure that our managers have the tools that they need, because we know that a lot of it is just in the day-to-day. We all kind of, especially right now, just hop up into our Zoom, and how we feel is such a daily experience. Like I might have been okay yesterday, but today there's a headline that's very triggering and now I feel a little bit different. And so managers just needing the tools to check in and have informal talks. So that's been a big part of our internal approach. Externally, we did make statements last year around, following George Floyd's murder. We have made statements, in response to, the continued acts of violence directed to Asian Americans. And again, we just talk to our employees about it, talk to our partners. Multiculturalism is very important to our brands. And so I would just say that conversations is a big part of our strategy and really informs our steps and our plans.
I think, Natasha and Madupe, I think the most important part that has made it so powerful for all three of our organizations is that our actions have been anchored in our values as a company. And so it wasn't that difficult for us to make that leap around respect, empathy, trust, right? All the things that we have always embraced around a culture of belonging. What does that mean? You want to be respected, heard, valued, all the recognized for what you do. All of those elements have played into this period, this moment of uncertainty, ambiguity, right? That whole VUCA mindset of the world, right? It being my team teases me because I call it the trifecta. We had election uncertainty, we had COVID, and then social justice matters. And George Floyd was the catalyst that turned the world upside down. But there were many, as Madupe so well pointed out, that came before him, that continued to come after him. And then we transitioned over to, and I don't mean to say transition, but then, the Asian violence was going on, but a lot more quieter in the background by the nature of their culture. So we've got to, if we think for a moment that social justice is no longer a part of this work, we're missing the mark. But it's a challenge, right, for organizations to ride that line of where do you cross over, right? And when do you cross over? So was the Capitol insurgence a political reaction when you denounced? We've made these statements. We denounced all forms of violence. We signed on to the Georgia anti-hate legislation. We participate actively with our government affairs teams on legislation that is consistent with equality. LGBTQ issues going on, rights. The voter suppression thing is a harder topic in general in terms of how we move forward. But I digress. I turn it back to you, Natasha.
That was good, Nancy. I'm enjoying that. I mean, that's awesome. Kudos to you all for making those bold commitments to the communities. That's awesome.
And kudos to you. It's just a pleasure to chat with you too.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I want to go back to where we started this with Shirley mentioning that, this is a topic that was requested. And so there may be some listeners whose organizations are really just trying to decide, when and how should they take a stance? Do they feel comfortable personally? Are their organizations comfortable? And so can you just share any perspective on, the risks, or if you want to frame it as the benefits of just, taking a stance on issues for the audience that is listening in?
I'll start. I think that there's a risk, there's a couple of risks of not taking some type of stance. I understand that not everyone has found their voice and really is clear on what their, what type of stance to take. And I tell people sometimes, if you want to protest, it doesn't mean you have to go out in the street to protest, but you can use your voice to try and impact communities or systems or experiences for your teams, right? And I think that one of the risks that companies run by not saying anything is it leaves the employees questioning if they work for a company that is committed to inclusion, belonging, and increasing diverse representation. So that whole notion of silence, it means that maybe you're complicit, right? And behind the scenes, as inclusion and diversity leaders, we know it's really because if the leaders say the wrong thing, there are so many implications of that, right? That, oh my goodness, what just happened? But we have to also be courageous enough to challenge our leadership to take a position, to find their voice, and to make a statement of some sort. It may not necessarily be in the media or leveraging social media to that degree, but it is extremely important for leaders to make a statement, a position, have a stance on something internally, because the employees want to model themselves after what they see their leaders do.
Thanks for that, Natasha. There is one piece that I'll add to that from a counter perspective, right? And I've said this before inside my company, that our workforce is a microcosm of our society. So we also have to recognize that not all of our employees are on board with our approach. And there is, I call it the 80-20, the Pareto theory, right? That there are, I'm estimating 20% of the people that feel differently. And we need to respect those voices as well. But we're not going to change our stance. So this then becomes an individual, I think, decision, right, about your personal values and the company values. So if the company has clearly been an upstander, which we are, and we denounce all of these forms of hate and racism and marginalization, all of those things, and we stay consistent with that, then we never have to waver in terms of our positioning. But at the same time, we do get pushback from employees saying we're crossing the line. Let's keep this stuff out of the workplace. For years, you've told us this was taboo. Now it's okay. What do I say? As you so well pointed out, Natasha, most people on the day of the weekend after George Floyd's death, many of our colleagues just couldn't really pull it together. I myself was struggling, and other people just went on business as usual and didn't even acknowledge it. It was a big deal. So I think creating that awareness for people, especially today, on my team meetings, before we open up, we start with a check-in, and we go around, just as you said, Natasha. Today I may be good, tomorrow, yesterday I wasn't. So we want to check in the moment. But anyway, I know we're close to time, so I'll stop there.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both. Well said, and I am so grateful to have been a part of this conversation. And I believe it's just about time to maybe turn it back over to you, Charlene, if there are not any questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And I mentioned it in the chat for you guys and for the audience that is watching us. There's a lot of comments, right? Everyone's like, there's exclamation points being thrown left and right. People are like, right on, this is so important. This should be discussed. I don't see a lot of questions, but I think that also speaks to where people are in regards to this topic, right? And we've spoken about how there's a lot going on internally, externally. What is your organization's message? I love, though, that you guys were part of this panel, because you all have wonderful examples of how your companies are a step ahead and everything that you've done and the results that you have to share. But not everyone in the audience is with an organization that is facilitating that type of change so quickly and so rapidly and so responsive. So I also want to just echo my thanks to you guys for joining this panel. It is a topic that is dear to everyone's hearts, I think, right now. And this means a lot to Opal Group, and it means a lot to the audience. So I want to make sure that is conveyed very much from myself personally and from our team as well. With that, we are at time, so I would love to wish you guys goodbye, and I will get ready to make some official ending announcements. But I also want to make sure you guys know, and everyone at home, that for those of you that have registered, these sessions are recorded and they will be made available to everyone in this platform. So if you want to rewatch this and come back in on Sunday with your cup of coffee and take some notes from you guys because you went over so much, that opportunity will be made available in about 24 hours after all of our videos render. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to go over a few more things. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.